Hey everyone, welcome to your Learn Lab. I'm Seema, and if you're an IGNOU student, you're in the right place. Here we create videos on different IGNOU courses to help you ace your exams. So hit subscribe and join me on this learning journey. Welcome to MEG-01 IGNOU British Poetry series. In today's video, we are going to explore one of Chaucer's most entertaining yet intellectually rich stories, The Nun's Priestess Tale. This tale is part of a much larger storytelling experiment, the Canterbury Tales. Chaucer does not give us an isolated series of stories. Instead, he creates a framework. First, we meet the pilgrims in the general prologue, then we follow their conversations and interactions on the journey. And within this moving frame, the tales are told. The Nun's Priest's Tale comes as a comic interlude, but don't let the barnyard setting fool you. Beneath the feathers and fable lies a narrative crafted with careful irony, dramatic tension, and moral insight. Chaucer draws on earlier Italian sources but gives the story his own distinctly English voice. The style of narration itself is a clue. The personality of the priest telling the tale subtly shapes the language and message. This isn't just a beast fable. It's a tale filled with sharp reflections on pride, dreams, persuasion, and storytelling. We'll break this down into key elements that Chaucer weaves together. The structure of a sermon, thoughtful reflection, the elevated tone of mock heroic poetry, moments of comedy, and a rich debate on dreams, all held together by a tale that teaches even as it entertains. So, let's begin our journey through this cleverly constructed story of a proud rooster, a cunning fox, and the deeper truths hidden in the simplest of plots. Let's begin with Chaucer's plan for the Canterbury Tales. In the general prologue, the host, Harry Bailey, suggests that each pilgrim tells 2 stories on the way to Canterbury and 2 on the return. This would make 124 tales in total. But Chaucer never finished the entire project. What we have today are 20 complete tales and 4 unfinished ones. And yet, the poem feels whole. Why? Because of how thoughtfully Chaucer structures it. We can think of the Canterbury Tales as having 3 main parts. The general prologue, which sets the scene and introduces the pilgrims, the tales where each character tells a story that reflects their personality, and the tale on the road, the dramatic conversations, quarrels, and commentary between tales. This structure allows for variety in tone, genre, and character. And that's what gives the tales their richness even without a perfect ending. The Nun's Priest's Tale provides comic relief, but also subtle wisdom. In his structuring, Chaucer doesn't just collect stories. He places them in meaningful order. One tale often responds to or mocks the one before it. The Knight's Tale opens with a high-minded romance about fate and honor. Theseus speaks of the first mover, a divine force that holds the universe in balance. Then the Miller's Tale turns everything upside down with a story full of trickery, lust, and absurd humor. The reeve insulted by the miller follows up with a tale that insults a miller in return. Now, when we reach the monk's tale, the tone becomes very serious. It's a series of tragedies, short accounts of famous figures who fall from power. But the host finds it too gloomy. He interrupts and asks for something lighter. That's when the nun's priest tells his tale, the Nun Priestess Tale. Even though it's a funny, animal story on the surface, it contains deep themes, the danger of pride, the power of flattery, and the question of free will. The Nun's Priest's Tale is a clever fable about Chanticleer, a proud rooster who nearly gets caught by a sly fox Russell. Chaucer tells the story in a mock-heroic style using grand formal language to describe barnyard events. It's funny because the style doesn't match the subject, but it also makes us pay attention to the underlying ideas. The tale explores pride, the danger of falling for flattery, and even the value of dreams. There is a debate between Chanticleer and his favorite hen, Pertelote, about whether dreams are foolish or meaningful. He wants her comfort, but she dismisses his fears. The tale lightly satirizes gender and love too. At one point, the cock quotes the Bible to support his romantic view. Woman is man's joy and all his bliss. This playful but pointed line reminds us of the wife of Bath, who also questions love, marriage, and power dynamics. So while the story is comic, it contains moral and intellectual layers and reflects the nun's priest's clever, balanced voice. Many scholars like G.L. Kittredge have described the Canterbury Tales as a human comedy. Why? Because in this work, people are not perfect. They reveal their flaws, confess their desires, and contradict each other, just like in real life. Through stories and arguments, the pilgrims show us who they really are. The wife of Bath talks boldly about marriage and power. The pardoner admits he preaches only for money. The canon's yeoman and merchant expose hidden frustrations. The talk on the road becomes a kind of drama in itself, especially around gender roles and moral authority. At the end of the tales, Chaucer adds something very important: his retraction. In it, he asks forgiveness for any parts of the work that might offend, especially stories with sinful or worldly themes. He ends up by pointing us not just toward Canterbury but toward a higher spiritual journey. Of tilk parfait glorious pilgrimage that height Jerusalem celestial. This gives the tales another layer. The physical journey becomes symbolic, a chance for self-reflection and repentance. Even in laughter, Chaucer leads us towards something deeper. Now, let's take a moment to understand the deeper structure of the Nun's Priest tale, how Chaucer builds the story and what that tells us about the storytelling itself. Modern theories say that storytelling is a way of creating order. We give shape to confusing or random experiences by turning them into stories. That's why fiction isn't just entertainment. It helps us understand the world. Humans are called symbol-using animals, and we use symbols, especially language, to think, feel, and communicate. And when we create fiction, we play with these symbols to explore big ideas like identity, pride, love, heaven, or fear. So when Chaucer tells us a story about a rooster dreaming of danger and then almost being eaten by a fox, it might look like a funny animal tale, but really it's about how we react to warning signs, handle pride, and learn from mistakes. This tale also follows a common narrative structure explained by scholar William Lebov. His model describes the basic pattern most stories follow. 1. We have orientation. The first part introduces the setting, a rich widow's farm, the rooster Chanticleer and his hens. Complications or conflict. The rooster dreams of being attacked. Bertolotte, his hen, argues dreams are meaningless. Crisis. The fox arrives, flatters him, and grabs him. Then we have resolution. Chanticleer tricks the fox with clever words and escapes. And last we have coda or moral. The tale ends with a lesson about pride, flattery, and listening to good advice. So Chaucer is not just telling a story, he is teaching us through structure. Finally, this tale belongs to a larger group of stories we find across cultures. It's a classic danger of death narrative where the hero escapes a deadly threat at the last moment. Think of folk tales, detective stories, even action films. They often follow the same pattern. That's what makes the Nun's Priest tale so rich. Under the comic surface, Chaucer is using the art of storytelling to explore how people think, fear, and survive. Now let's take a look at how the Nun's Priest tale is not a single story but a collocation, a structured grouping of multiple stories and speakers. At the broadest level, we have Chaucer the poet creating the Nun's Priest, who tells his tale about a poor widow whose humble cottage forms the setting of a beast fable involving Chanticleer the cock, Bertolotte the hen, and a sly fox. Within that fable, the cock tells dream stories. These are narratives within the narrative. Each layer deepens the meaning. So we move from Chaucer to the priest, to the widow's world, to the barnyard fable, and finally to the cock's dreams. The storytellers here is the cock, the priest, and Chaucer himself. These are all fictional constructs, but their voices are vivid, persuasive, and believable. This tale blends both oral and written forms of communication. It feels like a spoken story told around a fire, but it's also crafted with literary precision. Chaucer's tale is an example of fiction as a fabricated and feigned system, something made up, but meaningful. Fiction allows us to role-play, reflect, and explore human truths. As readers, we are not passive, we actively interpret. We recreate each voice in our minds, making meaning from symbols and structure. That's why the tale becomes a part of the literary canon and why you, as Indian scholars of English literature, form part of an ongoing community of interpretation. As the critic Northrop Frye puts it, people don't think up a set of assumptions or beliefs, they think up a set of stories and derive the beliefs from the stories. In reading the Nun's Priest's Tale, you're not just understanding Chaucer, you're also discovering how stories shape the way we think and live. In our previous slide, we saw how Chaucer plays with layers of storytelling, how the tale is embedded within other tales, and how narrator adds meaning. Now let's look more closely at the people behind this tale, especially the priest, the poet, and the widow, and ask, who is actually speaking, and how do their roles shape the meaning of the story? Chaucer did not invent this fable. It comes from the Roman De Renart, a popular medieval collection of satirical animal tales. But Chaucer made it his own by adding philosophical reflections, dream debates, and his trademark mock heroic tone. Interestingly, Chaucer keeps himself invisible in this tale. He lets the host, knight, and nun's priest speak. In the tale itself, it's only the priest and the animals who speak. The poet is almost silent except in framing phrases like "quoth the knight." Still, Chaucer's voice is indirectly present in the reflective digressions, especially in the first one, lines 471 to 84, on necessite conditional, which explores free will and divine order, and lines 581 to 88, where Chaucer ironically praises Geoffrey de Vinsauf, showing off a serio-comic tone. Lines 491 to 500, where the priest says, "I can none harm of no woman divine," also hinted Chaucer's ironic stance towards gender and romance. Let's now consider the characters. The widow is the only human character described in detail. She's poor but content, surrounded by animals, and described with precise, almost allegorical imagery. Her simplicity forms a sharp contrast to the prioress, who is elegant, mannered, and courtly. The priest, identified only in this tale, is later named Sir John. The host jokes about his strong physique in the epilogue, saying that if he weren't in the church, he'd be good at breeding hens. His lean horse, foul and lean, subtly critiques worldly luxury. He is no ordinary character. Some scholars see him as a clever misogynist, subtly mocking women and chivalric romances. And above all, he is an excellent narrator. His tale is structured, ironic, and thematically rich. Through these voices, the widow, the priest, and the silent poet, Chaucer explores how narrative shapes morality, how irony critiques ideals, and how storytelling becomes a tool for reflection. Let us look at the ironic structure of the tale, how Chaucer builds sympathy and detachment into his storytelling. The word irony comes from the Greek aironia, which means simulated ignorance, pretending not to know in order to say something indirectly. So irony is not just about words, it's dramatic, linked to action, situation, and contrast between appearances and truth. Think of the myth of Oedipus, where the audience knows what the hero doesn't. In the Nun's Priest's Tale, the irony is built into the plot. The fox and the cock outwit each other, each using flattery, pride, and trickery. Consider the lines 639 to 648, where Chanticleer escapes by turning the fox's own trick against him. But Chaucer's irony goes a little deeper. The priest who narrates cannot speak plainly. His position as the prioress chaplain demands discretion and politeness. So his critique of women, romance, and courtly ideals must be indirect and ironic. That's what makes his voice so fascinating. He both reflects and distances himself from the author. For example, as we saw earlier in lines 491 to 500, the priest says, "I can none harm of no woman divine." This cautious line may seem respectful, but is loaded with ironic reservation, especially since it follows a sly reference to woman's love of romantic tales like Launcelot the Lake. Even Chanticleer misuses a Latin quote, lines 391 to 400, which adds another layer of irony. Is the rooster just witty, or is the narrator playing games with learning and misquotation? The tale's digressions are crucial. The dream debate, the cock's vision, and the gender conflict with Berthelot, these superimpose symbolic meaning onto the central fable. They dramatize what Chaucer once called the age-old war of the sexes. Berthelot shames Chanticleer for being afraid, defending medieval ideas of bravery and romance. But she also stands for cold reason, while the rooster represents vision and instinct. They function as allegories of logic and emotion, rational calculation versus rash action. The tale also sets up the widow, humble and Christian, as a counter-ideal to Berthelot. Here, romantic love is challenged by spiritual simplicity. This reflects broader social change breaking through Chaucer's conservative worldview. And finally, the narrator himself is not spared. In lines like these, "My tale is of a cock that took his counsel of his wife with sorrow." He blames Berthelot, but the tale shows that the cock followed his own will. This confusion suggests that even the narrator is ironized, subject to comic ambiguity, of course. So Chaucer's irony works on multiple levels: language, structure, and character. It allows him to entertain, critique, and reflect all without speaking directly. Now that we've unpacked the tale's tone and irony, let's bring it all together by looking at its complex formal design. How Chaucer blends sermon, fable, comedy, and satire into one brilliant poetic structure. In our journey through Nun's Priest Tale, we've seen how Chaucer blends playfulness with purpose. This tale is not just a simple animal fable. In fact, it's built from complex web of literary forms: sermon, fable, mock heroic, epic, comic digressions, and dream vision. All these forms work together to produce a tale that teaches even as it entertains. By the end of the tale, the priest draws a moral. But so do the animals themselves. The cock says, "Always be alert," the fox says, "Think before you speak," and the priest offers his own version. This layered messaging is part of a long tradition, stories that mix narrative pleasure with moral instruction. We call such stories exempla. They are designed to teach through example. And Chaucer, as we will see, builds his teachings into every layer of the tale. Let's now look more closely at how Chaucer embeds moral and reflective layers within this tale. Since the nun's priest is, well, a priest, it's no surprise that his tale ends like a sermon. But notice how cleverly Chaucer frames his moralizing. The cock, the fox, and the priest all draw lessons, and each moral offers a different lens. The cock, having barely escaped death, says we must keep our eyes open, and the fox, who loses due to his own foolish pride, offers the rueful moral. And finally, the priest tells us, if you find the tale silly, at least take away the moral. The priest's reflection even appeals to the authority of St. Paul, showing how seriously he wants to frame his sermon. Yet, it's dramatic rather than preachy. That's one genius of Chaucer. The tale also gives us multiple reflective digressions on destiny, free will, woman's counsel, and even a mock serious comment on Geoffrey de Vinsauf, a medieval rhetorician. These reflections don't feel forced. They arise naturally from the storytelling, nudging us to question what's true and what's merely persuasive. Let's turn now to look at how Chaucer mixes his moral voice with comic exaggeration and parody through the mock heroic mode. So, one of Chaucer's most delightful technique is the mock heroic style, treating trivial matters with grand seriousness. Chanticleer is just a rooster, but he's described like a mighty lion. In fact, Berthelot cries louder than Hasdrubal's life in the sack of Carthage. The hen's grief is more dramatic than the fall of Troy or the burning of Rome. This is epic drama about barnyard animals. Even the sources of Chanticleer's courts, Cicero, Macrobius, are elevated references that make the tale feel deeply learned. But it's all tongue-in-cheek. Chaucer is gently mocking scholarly pretension, romance tropes, and even the pious tones of sermons. The nun's priest tries to sound serious and wise, but as readers, we are constantly reminded that this is just a tale of a cock and a fox. This switch between high and low style creates rich, serio-comic tension, and the tale is both a parody and poetry, making us laugh and reflect at the same time. Now let's move from this comic grandeur to the more introspective and symbolic realm of dreams, digressions, and double plots. The most intellectual part of the tale is its use of dreams. In medieval literature, dreams were often a poetic device suggesting insight, prophecy, or imagination. Chanticleer's dream of a hound-like beast is chilling and turns out to be accurate. But Berthelot, ever the rationalist, mocks him and recommends herbal laxatives. Their argument sets up the tale's central philosophical tension: instinct versus intellect, vision versus reason. To defend his dream, Chanticleer narrates a story he claims is from a great author, really, Cicero. A man dreams 3 times of his friend's murder, only the third dream is heeded. Moral: dreams have meaning. Chaucer's brilliance lies in how he lets his dream debate spill into the rest of the tale. The main action, fox flattery, escape, is only part of the structure. The subplot debates gender roles, misread signs, adds complexity. The tale constantly shifts styles from plain realism to romantic rhetoric. And through it all, Chaucer subtly mocks the priest himself. His reflections, especially around lines 486 to 500, are often confused, exposing his biases. In the end, the rooster escapes, the fox is fooled, and the narrator moralizes, but with a wink. The comedy, as Chaucer shows us, is not just in the animals. It's in the seriousness of how we tell stories and what we choose to believe. And that brings us to the end of our exploration of the Nun's Priest Tale. At first glance, this might seem like a simple farmyard fable: roosters, hen, and a sly fox. But we've seen how Chaucer weaves together rich strands of mock heroic drama, theological reflection, comic parody, and narrative irony to create something much deeper. This tale is about pride, but also about performance. It's about how stories are told, who gets to tell them, and what we can believe. It critiques love, gender, learning, and even religious authority, all while making us laugh. For your exam, remember, this tale is a perfect case study in literary form. You can cite it when discussing allegory, structures, satire, or the storyteller's voice. It's also great for comparing narrative technique and moral intention across the Canterbury Tales. So next time you hear a seemingly silly story, remember Chaucer's lesson: even a tale about a chicken can carry the weight of the world, if it's well told. Thank you so much for joining in today. Wishing you all the very best for your MEG-01 exam. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to your Learn Lab for more IGNOU study support. See you in the next one. Until then, happy learning and take care.